Hello, and thank you again for joining me on day 20 of our Bible study in the book of Matthew. We are in chapter 12. Chapter 12 starts out with an interesting one where Jesus went through the grain fields on the Sabbath. His disciples were hungry and began to pick some heads of grain and eat them. When the Pharisees saw this, they said to him, "Look, your disciples are doing what is unlawful on the Sabbath." This was an interesting one for me to do a little bit of research into, where the primary goal of research is trying to answer the question, did Jesus commit a sin by profaning the Sabbath? And what conclusion I came to is that I don't have any evidence to support that. Because even if you consider it evidence of the interpretation that the Pharisees took of the law for not harvesting on Sabbath, which other rabbis and other sects of Judaism, as I understand it, didn't consider that, and in fact they're held more to the commandment of leaving some of your grain and your crop in the corners of your field as a commandment for passersby to come and eat. Pharisees didn't see it that way, and they saw it as if you picked off any of those grains and ate it, you were profaning the Sabbath and working on the Sabbath. Other rabbis and other sects considered it a working on the Sabbath and thereby profaning it if you used a tool, but not if you used your hand. And supposedly somebody else interpreted it as if you used your fingertips it was okay, but not your whole hand to shuck the grain off of it. And I can't help but think that Christ and God, at some point during those arguments, start to get really frustrated because the people are missing the point. Kind of like today's world, where people lose their minds over what time during a church service do we partake of bread and wine, and what time should we pass baskets, and what time should we sing, and what time should we listen to a testimony or listen to a preaching of the preacher, or should we partake of separate cups, or one cup for the emblem, what type of bread, unleavened, leavened, the list goes on and on and on. And I think, so to speak, Christ would probably be rolling over in his grave at the thought of people missing the point so much. But here's the thing, even if you consider it evidence, because the Pharisees do believe that he was breaking the law, which is based, as far as I can tell, on their own interpretation of the law, and they're taking some liberties to interpret it the way that they do. It doesn't say Jesus picked it, and it doesn't say Jesus ate it. It says Jesus was in the grain fields, and it talks about how Jesus defended his disciples in their action, but he didn't himself partake, at least not what I can see. So that was helpful for me to see that, okay, well, did Christ commit sin? And if he did at least break the Sabbath, what's the story behind it? Because he lived a sinless life to save us all, and if he didn't, then that sacrifice wouldn't have as much value, would it? But no, he didn't sin. He was accused of sin by Pharisees, just like they continually accused him of so many things, not the least of which is having Beelzebub and being, I guess, a servant of Beelzebub as a means of casting out other demons, if that makes any sense. Jesus says, haven't you read what David did when he and his companions were hungry? He entered the house of God, and he and his companions ate the consecrated bread, which was not lawful for them to do, but only for the priests. Or haven't you read in the law that the priests on Sabbath duty in the temple desecrate the Sabbath, and yet are innocent? I tell you that something greater than the temple is here. If you had known what these words mean, I desire mercy and not sacrifice, you would not have condemned the innocent, for the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath. I think Jesus was not responding to them in their terms of legality, and instead responding to them in a expression of their own standards that they're holding for David back to what they're at right now. He's like, why are you okay with David doing this and not okay with what's happening here? Why are you okay with the priest desecrating the Sabbath and yet being innocent, and yet you're not okay with this because of your own interpretation of the law, which isn't the law, it's an interpretation of the law. There's a reason Jesus responds in that way, and I'm not sure what it is. It's kind of like the story of the lady that was caught in adultery and they wanted to stone her, and Jesus is calm and is writing in the sand and says, "Him who is without sin cast the first stone." And of course nobody's without sin, so they didn't cast the stone. And he looks around and looks at the woman and says, "Has no man condemned you? No, neither will I. Go and sin no more." The way he answers people is deliberate, and it's deliberate for a reason that I do not understand. Maybe it's because he wants them to think, not just hear, I guess. Hear his words and listen to his words. He wants them to think about it and come to the conclusion. Maybe. One second. What I was trying to get at is that whenever I was researching this and I came to the spot where it's listing the 10 Commandments, and I was looking at what it said about the Sabbath, and it was amazing to me just how much less there was there than what the Pharisees were trying to proclaim, and how much was added after the fact. But looking back to like the heart of what the Sabbath was. Let's see if I can bring it up. Keeping the Sabbath day holy. Let's see. But the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord your God. In it you shall do no work. You, nor your son, nor your daughter, nor your male servant, nor your female servant, nor your cattle, nor your stranger who is within your gates, the sojourner that you're hosting in hospitality. None of you is to do any work. But I think, if I remember right, something that was added after the fact is you're not to have any fires in your house. And that was interesting to me because I think they're associating fire with cooking, and they don't like the idea of cooking, some of them. What if it's cold? Is that going to be considered work because you made a fire to stay warm? And you can kind of see the extremism with legalistic views and how it begins to muddle the waters in a bad way, and how there's value in instead trying to seek out the point of what the original commandment was, which is a part of the 10 Commandments. And it's supposed to be this break from work, bringing yourself back to seeking God and having communion with Him, and yeah, the biggest point is not doing work. But then there's so much muddled water on what is considered work. I literally got not very far into the chapter at all, but this is a very interesting topic to me because of the Because depending on who you are and how you interpret the law, specifically of Sabbath, some, like the Pharisees, would claim that Jesus had committed sin. I don't see it that way. I don't think you should either. I appreciate you watching, and please like and subscribe if you'd like to see more content. And I'll see you tomorrow.